Hi, Leah. How are you?
Hi, Mathilde. Good. How are you?
Good. Good to see you here. Welcome to Jam Online.
Thanks. What
Matilda,
a great day so far.
sorry for jumping in, but if you take off the screen share, that will mean that your faces show up for everybody.
You got it. So I'm not sharing anything though. So that is probably. Oh, that's fine. Wonderful. You should all see us now and not the slides, hopefully. All right. So Leah, welcome back. You're here to tell us, to share the story about a pivot today, the way your team at Uptime pivoted during the pandemic and what you learned from it. Super excited to hear about that. But first, I wanted to quickly introduce you. So you started your product management career building Charity Job and the leading job board in the charity and nonprofit sector. You then spent time at Bumble. We heard Lara from Bumble earlier. So you were a product manager there, and then also at Badoo as a senior PM. So would it be fair to say that you helped millions, I think 500 million people to connect and date worldwide?
Yeah, pretty much.
Humble brag, you can say that. All right, so and then from charity to dating, you moved to EdTech last year. So you're now a product lead at Uptime, which is I would say a bite-sized learning app that helps people through video content and through playlists access fresh perspectives on topics that matter to their professional and personal developments. So first question I have for you is, how did it feel to when you first started at Uptime, coming from companies with more established products like Bumble?
It's very different, but I was actually really excited to join. I think I was employee number 5 when I joined, so it was very early stage, and it was really exciting to just build something from scratch, from the beginning. And back then we had there were the founders obviously, and they had this really strong vision, and they had solid funding, and there were all those talented people that were joining the team. So it was actually really exciting. And we spent a lot of time working on who we were as a company, on building our mission, our vision, our ways of working, our values, and it felt great. I was really proud. I mean, we're trying to help people access education. We're trying to make education accessible to all in one safe space, and that's a really great mission to work on. So things were going really well.
So you told me you were like, it felt like being on a high-speed train, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we went from 5 people to over 40 something pretty much overnight. So yeah, it moved really fast. We were making decisions really fast. We agreed on our whole launch strategy over the Christmas dinner. And the next day was like, let's put it into place, let's action it. So yeah, it moved really fast.
And so you told me that actually back in May, everything changed. So you went from speed as a habit to a completely different way of working. And so what happened? Can you walk us through?
Well, we realized that our model wasn't scalable and it wasn't sustainable. And so we had to pivot.
And so can you tell us a bit about, so what were you building exactly? What was the app, and then what was the pivot?
Yeah, sure. So we were building a video platform. So we were curating video, and we were also producing video with experts in their field. And that was quite a costly process and a time-intensive process. So think maybe, Netflix level of production, maybe not quite, but, close to it. So that was a process that was quite premium in a sense. And at the same time, we were building a product that needed tons and tons and tons of content to work, because it was centered around personalization. So those two things.
So yeah, basically the curation of the educational content with experts, educational videos, and then surfacing this through an app that's personalized and offer bite-sized learning, if that's right. And then you realized that wasn't sustainable. So what didn't work with this model?
So what happened is the confinement happened, and then the investment market became very volatile. So we we were at risk that maybe we would have to delay the next funding round. And that's something that I guess we couldn't risk it. So we had to be a lot more cost effective straight away. And that really forced us to take a little bit of a pause and rethink, how we were going about things, and actually rethink everything. Rethink our tech, rethink our product, even our business model, because we were forced into that thought process. I don't know if you watched Friends. I mean, I'm sure you have, right? So
Yeah,
it's yeah, wow, me too. You know that scene when there's like Ross and Rachel and Chandler, and they have that couch, they're trying to get up the stairs, and like they turning and going back and turning and going back, and he's shouting at them, he's like, pivot, and by the end of it, there's no couch left. It's broken into two.
I remember that.
Yeah, that felt very close to reality. So you just swap the couch, you put a product instead, and then you add 40 people, and here you go, you get the picture of what happened.
I love a good old Friends reference. So it's like trying to basically change everything with your team in the stairs, and nothing would work. No, I see the picture. It seems like the pandemic had a big impact on teams, on strategies. I mean, it seemed to be huge, specifically as you were on such a high speed and you had loads of momentum before. I mean, just an observation.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Think about yourself and your team and your current structure and what you're building, what you're working on. If I were to tell you suddenly that tomorrow we may cut your resource into half, or that maybe you have half of the time to do the same thing, would you actually keep building the same thing? Would you still go about it the same way? And I think that's what happened to us. So the pandemic forced us to ask ourselves that question. If we were to have only half of the resource we currently have, would we be making the same decision? And the answer was no.
That's interesting. I mean, it seems like I don't know if that was the case for you. If I understand correctly, basically your main lesson learned those past 6 months has been asking yourself the question, like, what would I do? What would I build if I had half of the resources, and what it's actually worth building, right?
Yeah. So it's not, I mean, we pivoted because the model wasn't scalable. But to be able to realize that the model wasn't scalable, we had to go through this entire thought process. And really what triggered the thought process was the fact that we had a newfound scarcity. And I think that's something you can always keep in mind, right? You don't need a pandemic to force that question. You could always keep that in mind whenever you're making a strategic decision, or whenever you're building on a new feature, whatever it is you're doing. And just ask yourself, if you had half of the resource you have, would you be going about it the same way? And I think that really forced you to make a better decision making. It forced better use of resource, and it forced you to be even leaner than you were in the first place.
I think it's a nice way of thinking about this, like the question you've asked, because often, I don't know what you think about that, I feel like the word pivot is a bit of a dirty world in the startup world. We're all used to pivoting, like, and then pivots are good. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of startup founders and product leads just think of it as a last resort almost, because it comes often as like, if you pivot, then maybe it invalidate your previous decisions or your previous vision or strategy, right? So what do you think of that?
I think you have to pivot early. It's true. I think it's often considered as a last resort solution, and that's not great, because the reality is you need time to pivot. You're going to need to have that runway to actually come up with a better solution to your idea, and give your team a real shot at it. But I think one of the reasons why it's such a last resort solution is because, even if we're trying to work with this methodology, even if we're used to fail fast, learn, iterate, etc., it's still quite hurtful to do so. You get emotionally attached to your product. I personally did emotionally attached to the product we built. It's your work, it's a lot of effort. So it's not actually that easy to just differentiate the emotion from the logical decision. And that might be one of the reasons why people are pushing it to the last resort.
Yeah, makes sense. And so in that context, because it's so hard and there's so much of our personalities into it, how would you, I mean, are there any signals, I guess, to know that it's time to actually just go all in and just not just go for incremental changes, but just completely change strategy? Or
No, that's the question that's actually so easy to answer afterwards. So now that we've done it, it's like, oh yeah, of course we had to pivot. But actually, when you're in the middle of it, it's really not that clear. It's a very blurry line between, continuing to iterate on your current solution versus actually choosing to move on to something else. It's not that straightforward.
And so, I mean, I assume now because you said that started a bit, I mean, during lockdown, right? That you went from one strategy to the other and really going away from this kind of like manual expert curation of video content. So you might still be in the middle of the pivots, but I guess I'm curious to hear like what your thoughts are on how do you measure if a pivot is successful? Like how do you know if it's a successful or a good pivot? Is it after the fact? And whilst you're doing it, is there anything you should be looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, the output is a case-by-case scenario, right? It's different for everybody. But for one thing that can make it definitely easier or can help to make it successful is to set expectation from the beginning. That the pivot, you're pivoting towards uncertainty. So there's a lot of unknown when you choose to pivot. And it takes time. And I think if you can set that as an expectation from the beginning, it really helps navigate the situation. And while you do that, if you actually remember that you're pivoting your strategy, you're pivoting the what, but not the why. The why you're doing something remain the same. It really helps you move forward. And I think that helps to make it successful eventually.
And it seems like in your case, the why, because you had such a strong vision and mission around making education more accessible, that kind of helped you potentially in this case. It's really helpful. And so it seems like it's been a roller coaster for you, and especially I can only imagine. I also know you personally, and I know that when you go remote for the first time, and all of this adds to the challenge, right? So, is there any skill, like soft or hard skill, that helped you as a product leader in this challenging time, this past 6 months or so?
Resilience. Resilience. You just have to build resilience. It's for me, it's a skill that I've learned in the past, because when I was a student, actually, I was also fundraising for charity. And to do that, I had to go door to door to business environment and speak to the employee on the bus and basically ask them for credit card detail. And I was a perfect stranger. So you can imagine people weren't exactly happy to give me their credit card information to give money away. And it was, I mean, I think it could have been really downing. It could have been something where you're just like, I give up and I'll do something else. But back then we had this say that every time you get a no, it gets you closer to a yes. And so it would completely change your perspective on things. You would get very excited. Every time somebody would tell you no, you'd be like, yeah, okay, next person's going to be a yes, I'm going to get the money. And actually, when I was doing that, I raised something between 1.5 and 2 million for charity. So it really worked. And it's exactly the same in the product. I think you can take exactly the same skills and think, every time we fail, we're getting closer to the answer, and really learn how to adapt and bounce back quickly.
That's interesting. As a resilience, and there's a lot of research on this, and I think it's just interesting how we just practice it day to day, right? You said no can be also a step towards something else, and you can learn from it. And okay, so maybe a last question, because I know we're at time. So do you have any last piece of advice for us specifically on how, because you mentioned uncertainty a few times, right? And how important it is to learn how to deal with it and embrace it as a product leader. So any last piece of advice for us on how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of us work quite fast. We're in an environment where, velocity is a big thing, and we just move on really fast. And I think it's very important once in a while to take a step back and actually just ask yourself, change your perspective, force yourself to change your perspective. And one way to do that is just ask yourself, what if we had half of the resource we currently have? Would we actually be going about it the same way? And if the answer is no, maybe there's something that's not quite right, and maybe you could improve on your model. Yeah, I think that can be useful in any case.
I like that. That's a very clear kind of question. So how to think with a more like scarcity, I guess, mindset. Yeah, thank you so much. That was super insightful. I know you're gonna stick around during lunch. You're gonna be in the food hall, I think table 1. If anybody wants to chat with you, ask you more questions about pivoting